What do Halle Berry, Rihanna, and Mariah Carey have in common? They were all in domestically abusive relationships. Out of childhood can be a setup. If we've been exposed to domestic abuse, there's parts of our subconscious or parts of us that think there's something that seems very normal about this. Having this thought that's like, oh gosh, if I just worked harder or did more, it would get to the point of where it was at while we were dating. With Mariah's example, with the love bombing, it's so important to listen to our bodies because our mind will justify it. A lot of us are very kind girls, just like Halle Berry, Rihanna, and Mariah Carey. And our minds can justify it. Oh, they're changing. Oh, they didn't mean that. Oh, he said he was sorry. Things like that. It must be weak people that get into the abusive situation that are victims. And that's actually not true. And that's what we're going to learn about from these Hollywood women and their abusive situations. What do Halle Berry, Rihanna, and Mariah Carey have in common? They were all in domestically abusive relationships. There can be a lot of misbeliefs when it comes to domestic abuse. For one, many people think, oh, it's definitely more in just these certain social economic statuses, and that's not true. Another one, that it must be weak people that get into the abusive situation that are victims, and that's actually not true. And that's what we're going to learn about from these Hollywood women and their abusive situations. So let's see what they can teach us this week. First of all, just a reminder, destructive relationships can definitely actually be really abusive, and it can be hard to tell. When there's physical abuse, it's much easier to see, but the psychological, the financial, religious, all the different sorts of abuse are all part of abusive relationships. The big differential is that there's a power and control difference, and one party has more power and control than the other, and that's really when you can start to question what's going on. And we'll talk afterwards about, well, how do we miss that we're even in an abusive relationship and the key parts of that. So let's start with Halle Berry. For her, I think the big lesson is talking about how our childhood can be a setup, and that's how she didn't even see it. Because before she knew it, she was in an abusive situation, but her message is clear, and it is get out. She encourages victims not to stay a moment longer in a harmful situation. She's like, if there's no shelter involved, she advises seeking help from friends, family, police. And from her experience, we can learn that a childhood can be a setup. If we've been exposed to domestic abuse, there's parts of our subconscious or parts of us that think there's something that seems very normal about this, or that we don't see it as actual abuse, and we can be attracted to it and be in it longer. So her experience is leave, sever it, and work on yourself. So that's great advice from Halle Berry. Rihanna. She's a great example of that hope can kill you, that having hope or belief in someone to change them is not helpful and can be super destructive, because she initially believed that she could change him and she felt protective of him. However, she eventually realized that she couldn't endure this situation any longer and had to walk away. And it's really interesting how hope can be used destructively in abusive situations, because a lot of the women in these situations are very hopeful. We believe the best, we hope for the best, and that is plain destructive in these situations. The good question to ask is, would you be with this person right now? Would you choose this person right now with what you know? And then go with that. That's very important information. I know for my example, boy, I kept having this thought that's like, oh gosh, if I just worked harder or did more, it would get to the point of where it was at while we were dating. Because while we were dating, it was amazing. And then on the honeymoon, that's when we had that transition and the stark contrast. And you can learn all about that in the first 8 episodes. So, toxic part of hope. Have you gone through a breakup that's kind of left you rattled and maybe questioning yourself some? Do you find that you're a pretty kind person that's chronically overgiving, overfunctioning, and maybe you're just plain tired and maybe a little resentful? Do you feel like you're going through the motions of life, but you're not really living your life? Well, that's what the Unravel notebook is for. It's 61 days for you to create your life by intent and unravel your thoughts and beliefs, so you can connect with God, yourself, and others in a better, more intentional way and live brighter. Mariah Carey, her example is love bombing. And again, love bombing is where you're getting all of these, everything you could ever want, and then there's a shift. It could be slow, it could be fast, but once they have you hooked, Then there's the change, and that's when it gets destructive, and then the destructive gets abusive, and then you get in the addictive cycle of abuse, which is so weird to think that abuse can be addictive, but it works with our brain very addictively. We have a awful abusive situation, and then he repents and he's sorry, and you think he's going to change, and then you have great times together, and then the cycle keeps going. Super addictive on our brains and our bodies. So with Mariah Carey, her first marriage to Tommy Mottola from Sony Music Entertainments, he seemed really decent in the beginning, and it just quickly deteriorated. And it was basically, as she would describe, a slow and steady march into captivity. And I just think that is like such a good description of it, because when you are in a destructive, abusive situation, you feel very trapped. And again, her childhood experience was also a setup, so that's something else to listen to. With Mariah's example, with the love bombing, it's so important to listen to our bodies, because our mind will justify it. A lot of us are very kind girls, just like Halle Berry, Rihanna, and Mariah Carey, and our minds can justify it. Oh, they're changing. Oh, they didn't mean that. Oh, he said he was sorry. Things like that, or like things can get better. I just need to work harder. Oh, I'm part of the problem. There's all sorts of stuff that our mind will justify, and that is part of how it creates this abusive cycle. So what the mind justifies, the body will definitely keep the score. And that's what I talk about that book, The Body Keeps the Score, and how phenomenal it is, because it really talks about how easy our mind can justify, but our body doesn't. And what that means is we could be in, I think some really great symptoms of a destructive and abusive relationship is high anxiety or high stress, tense body all the time. It could be physical challenges, because a body can only handle so much stress, so it's going to come out some way. Or there's going to be a need to buffer. Like, I have some friends that they were in abusive situations and they started drinking because that's how they could buffer the situation rather than deal with it. And so there's lots of things that we can do to buffer the situation, or that our body will just get more tense or more anxious. But basically our bodies are on fight and flight all the time. And that's very destructive on our bodies. Not a good thing. So it's so important to listen to our bodies, because our mind will tend to justify. I think a lot of women, especially if there's not physical abuse involved, they have a very difficult time until years maybe after getting out of the relationship to know that they were even in an abusive situation. And really, when your soul is like dying and your body is like reacting, that is some major yellow flags and some red flags to be investigated. A good way to know is to talk to like the abuse hotline, or talk to somebody that's in a healthy relationship, because they can actually spot things so much easier. When we're in it, we're usually in it, we're isolated, we're also mentally like involved in it. But once we start talking to people that are healthy, like, and have a good sound relationship, it's easy for them to spot things that we cannot see. And that's why a counselor, a good friend, the abuse hotline can be super important, because again, that psychological abuse is very difficult to see. Also, just finding, again, that support, being honest with ourselves. I mean, gosh, I was great at tolerating bad behavior. And so that's why I did a lot of work on myself, because that was part of what I call a kind girl, or high functioning codependency, as Terry Cole mentioned in our last few episodes. And that was allowing and perpetuating the problem, because I was not addressing the situation as I could have. So tolerating bad behavior, not okay. And then again, don't be hopeful, because it's interesting. We have to take people as they are right now. Don't like justify it because of their bad childhood, or don't believe like I did that they would be back to a place that they were before, because it was possible that you were just love bombed, or in my case, I was love bombed, where I was shown these things, but that wasn't the real person. You know the real person by living with them and by looking at their behaviors, their regular pattern of behaviors. That's the most important. And then the most important is if it's a dangerous situation, leave, sever, be safe, work on self, and really seek a specialist. I cannot talk about that more. And a great specialist or be able to talk to is domestic abuse hotline. It's confidential. And that's a great way to start talking about what's going on. Super important. So that's what we can learn about Hollywood women. First of all, it is a lot of times the strong women. It doesn't matter about your social economic class. There is a lot of research, a lot of great podcasts, a lot of information. If you feel the yellow flag or red flag, pause and help yourself. Do what you need to do. I believe in you. Pass this along to others that may benefit from it. And you can also look me up on Instagram with Live Brighter with Tara. And you can go to the website with livebrighter.info. Have a great day. I believe in you. Talk to you later.